Imagine being 19 years old, crouched in a muddy foxhole as artillery shells scream overhead. Your hands won't stop shaking. Your best friend from basic training just stopped moving beside you. This wasn't what the recruitment posters showed. This is raw, primal terror that strips away everything you thought you knew about courage. Today, we're descending into the 7 levels of fear that turned ordinary men into warriors, or broke them completely. What you're about to discover will change how you see bravery forever. The fear of the unknown. The transport ship rocks violently as it approaches the beach. Young soldiers, most barely out of high school, grip their rifles with white knuckles. They've trained for months, but nothing prepares you for actual combat. The fear of the unknown gnaws at every man aboard. What does a bullet actually feel like? Will I freeze when the ramp drops? Can I actually kill another human being? These questions spiral endlessly through their minds. Statistics reveal that over 60% of soldiers admitted their greatest fear before first combat was simply not knowing what to expect. The human brain desperately seeks patterns and predictability, but war offers neither. Every soldier heading into their first battle faces this psychological torment. They've heard the stories from veterans, seen the training films, but experience remains the cruelest teacher. The night before D-Day, thousands of paratroopers sat in darkness, each man alone with his thoughts, despite being surrounded by brothers in arms. Some wrote letters they hoped would never be sent. Others prayed to gods they'd long forgotten. A few simply stared into nothing, trying to imagine the unimaginable. The chaplains moved through the ranks, offering comfort, but even they couldn't chase away the darkness of uncertainty. This first level of fear is universal, touching every soldier, regardless of nationality or cause. It's the foundation upon which all other battlefield fears are built, the gateway through which every warrior must pass. But once that first bullet cracks past your head, everything changes. What happens when training meets reality? The fear of sudden death. The ramp drops. Chaos erupts instantly. Machine gun fire tears through the air like angry hornets. Men fall before taking 3 steps. This is the fear of sudden death, immediate and random. Unlike the abstract worry of Level 1, this terror is concrete, happening in real time all around you. A soldier to your left clutches his throat. The man behind you simply ceases to exist in a red mist. Studies from World War II combat psychiatrists revealed that soldiers could process the concept of death in abstract terms, but the reality of seeing death manifest instantly, randomly, indiscriminately, created a unique psychological trauma. Your brain cannot calculate safety. There's no pattern to predict. Death arrives without warning, without reason, selecting victims through pure chance. The German MG-42 machine gun fired 1,200 rounds per minute, each bullet a potential sudden end. Soldiers describe this fear as paralyzing. Your body wants to freeze, to make yourself invisible, but survival demands movement. The contradiction creates cognitive dissonance that some never overcome. Medics reported treating soldiers who were physically unharmed but mentally shattered, unable to advance or even speak. They'd witnessed so much instant death that their minds simply shut down. Omaha Beach on June 6, 1944, exemplified this level of fear perfectly. Men landed in kill zones with nowhere to hide. The first wave suffered 90% casualties in some companies. Those who survived described an almost out-of-body experience, moving through a nightmare where death plucked men away like a cruel magician's trick. Yet soldiers pushed forward. They adapted. But adaptation came with its own terrible price. What happens when you survive long enough to see a pattern? the fear of prolonged suffering. Artillery shells transform the battlefield into hell on earth. Unlike the quick death of bullets, artillery brings the terror of slow, agonizing injury. Soldiers in foxholes listened to the whistle of incoming shells, each one potentially carrying dismemberment, burns, or gut wounds that meant hours or days of suffering before death's mercy arrived. This fear gnawed deeper than sudden death because it involved imagination and anticipation. World War II saw unprecedented artillery use. The Soviet Katyusha rockets, German Nebelwerfers, and American howitzers created constant barrages that could last hours or days. Soldiers couldn't fight back against artillery. They could only endure, hoping their foxhole wasn't the one selected by mathematics and trajectory. In between bombardments, they'd emerge to find friends torn apart, still alive but beyond saving. Morphine supplies ran short. Men begged to be shot rather than transported with their injuries. Medical advances meant soldiers survived wounds that would have killed men in previous wars. This was both blessing and curse. A soldier at Monte Cassino described finding a German soldier with both legs gone, alive and conscious, calling for his mother. The American sat with him until he died, unable to provide real help, haunted by the encounter for decades afterward. The fear of prolonged suffering created its own madness. Some soldiers took reckless chances, preferring quick death to the possibility of lying wounded in no man's land. Others became obsessively protective of their abdomen, knowing gut wounds were among the worst. Superstitions flourished. Men carried talismans, religious medals, photographs of loved ones as psychological shields against this particular dread. But there was something soldiers feared even more than their own suffering. What could be worse than pain?
The fear of failing your brothers. In the frozen hell of Bastogne, surrounded and outnumbered, American soldiers faced a fear that transcended personal survival: letting down the men beside them. This social fear proved more powerful than death itself. Soldiers who might flee from danger alone would charge machine gun nests when their brothers depended on them. The 101st Airborne, encircled during the Battle of the Bulge, held their ground not from orders but from mutual obligation. Military psychologists discovered that unit cohesion was the primary factor in combat effectiveness. Soldiers didn't fight for abstract concepts like democracy or freedom in the moment of truth. They fought for the man next to them, for their squad, their platoon. The fear of being labeled a coward, of abandoning comrades, of living with the knowledge that your failure caused your friends' deaths, this terror drove men to extraordinary acts. Private Desmond Doss, a conscientious objector who refused to carry a weapon, repeatedly ran into fire on Okinawa to rescue wounded soldiers. He saved 75 men, driven entirely by refusing to let his brothers die alone. His fear of failing them overwhelmed his fear of death. This wasn't unique. Countless soldiers performed similar acts, most unrecorded, driven by this same powerful social bond. The flip side was devastating. Soldiers who froze in combat, who couldn't advance when needed, who broke under pressure, often never forgave themselves. Post-war studies revealed that many World War II veterans struggled more with guilt over perceived failures than with the violence they'd witnessed or inflicted. The social dimension of fear created obligations stronger than self-preservation instincts. Yet even this powerful bond couldn't protect soldiers from the next level of fear. What happens when the mind itself becomes the enemy? The fear of losing your humanity. After weeks of continuous combat, something changes inside. Soldiers reported feeling themselves transform into something other than the men who'd left home. The fear of losing your humanity, of becoming a monster, haunted thoughtful warriors. At first, killing the enemy required psychological preparation, justification, emotional distance. But combat's brutal mathematics demanded efficiency. Hesitation meant death. Compassion was a luxury none could afford. Studies revealed that prolonged exposure to combat created psychological changes that alarmed even the soldiers themselves. Men found themselves feeling nothing when killing. Worse, some discovered they were good at it, even enjoyed it. A Marine on Iwo Jima described methodically clearing caves with flamethrowers, burning Japanese soldiers alive, and feeling only satisfaction at eliminating threats. Later, stateside, he wept at the memory, horrified at what he had become. The dehumanization necessary for survival cut both ways. Viewing the enemy as subhuman made killing easier, but corroded the killer's self-image. American soldiers used racial slurs for Japanese enemies. German soldiers viewed Soviets as inferior, creating psychological distance that facilitated violence. Yet, after battles, collecting enemy letters and photographs, soldiers confronted the humanity they denied, creating cognitive dissonance that many never resolved. Some soldiers embraced the transformation, becoming efficient killers who volunteered for the most dangerous missions. They frightened their own comrades. Most soldiers feared becoming these men, feared the darkness they felt growing inside themselves. Letters home became harder to write. How do you explain to your mother that you're not sure if you're still her son? The war created a chasm between who they were and who they'd become. But there was another fear, quieter but more insidious. What terrified soldiers even in moments of relative safety? The fear that it will never end. Spring 1945, somewhere in Germany. The war is nearly over, but soldiers don't know this. They've been fighting for years, seen countless friends die, and can't imagine a world without war anymore. This psychological trap, the fear that combat would continue forever, that normal life was just a fantasy, broke men who'd survived everything else. The human psyche isn't designed for perpetual crisis. Combat fatigue, shell shock, battle exhaustion. The military had many names for the same phenomenon. Minds breaking under sustained stress. Statistics revealed that every soldier had a breaking point, usually around 200 to 240 days of sustained combat. Beyond this, effectiveness plummeted. Men developed thousand-yard stares, stopped caring about survival, became numb to everything. The fear wasn't of dying anymore, but of this endless purgatory continuing forever. Soldiers in the Pacific Theater particularly struggled with this fear. Island-hopping campaigns meant one horrific battle followed another with no end visible. After Guadalcanal came Tarawa, then Saipan, then Peleliu, then Iwo Jima, then Okinawa. Each victory just meant another island, another beach, another generation of casualties. Veterans described feeling like Sisyphus, forever pushing the boulder uphill, never reaching the summit. The psychological impact manifested in various ways. Some soldiers became reckless, taking stupid chances because they'd stopped believing in a future. Others became obsessively superstitious, developing elaborate rituals they believed kept them alive. A few simply gave up, stopped trying, and waited passively for death. The fear of endless war created a unique despair that peace, when it finally came, couldn't immediately cure. Yet, one final fear remained, perhaps the cruelest of all. What did soldiers fear after surviving everything? The fear of going home. VA Day, victory in Europe. Soldiers should celebrate, but many felt only emptiness and dread. The fear of going home, of returning to a world that couldn't possibly understand what they'd experienced, terrified veterans in ways combat never did. How do you explain the unexplainable? How do you live among people who've never smelled burning flesh, never held a dying friend, never killed another human being? This fear manifested even before soldiers left the front. They wrote letters home that grew increasingly distant, creating emotional buffer zones. Families expected the boys they'd sent away to return, but strangers arrived. Men in their early 20s with ancient eyes, startled by car backfires, unable to sleep without nightmares, uncomfortable with civilian trivialities. The gap between experience and understanding created profound isolation. Studies of World War II veterans revealed that most struggled with reintegration. The greatest generation carried silent burdens, drinking heavily, suffering nightmares, experiencing what we now call PTSD, but what they simply endured as the price of service. They feared being pitied, feared being seen as broken, feared their communities learning what they'd done and become. Many buried their experiences deep, refusing to speak of the war for decades. Some veterans actually missed combat. The clarity of purpose, the intensity of brotherhood, the simplicity of survival. These elements created meaning that civilian life couldn't match. Coming home meant losing the only people who truly understood them. Veterans organizations formed not from patriotism, but from need. Spaces where men could exist without explanation, where silence spoke volumes, where the fear of isolation could finally rest. These 7 levels of fear transformed a generation. They remind us that courage isn't the absence of fear, but continuing despite it.
These WWII soldier fear levels reveal the profound battlefield fears in WWII that shaped an entire generation. The fear faced by WWII soldiers went beyond physical danger, encompassing deep psychological battles. Understanding the 7 levels of fear in war helps us appreciate the soldier fear during WWII and the immense courage required daily. The top fears of WWII soldiers, from uncertainty to homecoming, created lasting WWII combat trauma that many carried silently for decades. The psychology of WWII soldiers shows us that war trauma and fear are battles that continue long after the guns fall silent. Remember their sacrifice. Honor their struggle.